Director, the Executive Director of the New England League of Middle Schools. And I want to thank everyone for joining us today as we kick off our NELMS Dialogue series. The topic for today is keeping the positive energy flowing into October. Facilitating today's topic is Jason Everhart, principal at Littleton Middle School in Littleton, Massachusetts. The presentation portion of today's session, as you just found out, will be recorded. And when we begin the Q&A portion, I will turn off the recording. So just want to get this started and turn this over to Jason. Thank you very much, Jason.
All right. Thanks, Jeff. Thank you all for making time to be here today. I'm extremely honored to be here to present, and I look forward to sharing with you some things that have kept me positive as the years go on. I'll give you just a little background on me. I was a full-time teacher for 17 years. I spent 10 years in Cambridge and 4 years in Newton. And I loved it. I wasn't ever sure that I was ready to walk away from the classroom, but as I got further into my career, realizing I wanted something more, I began the admin route. So I feel like after 17 years in the classroom, I've learned a thing or two about having to stay positive, and now being on the admin side, that's a whole different ball game. So I'd like to just share a few things with you, and then as we get close to the end, if you have questions, you feel free to put them in the chat or stick around for a Q&A. I'd love to be able to help you, or just kind of kick some ideas around if you're so inclined. So why don't we go ahead and jump right in? So the goal of today is to figure out, how do you stay positive once the honeymoon is over, right? The first day, everybody's excited, the kids are on their best behavior, everybody's well dressed, everything runs like it's supposed to, ideally. But after a while, right, old routines set in, not just for the kids, but for us as well. And so how do you keep from getting into that cycle of looking at the calendar and going, oh my God, this is going to be such a long year? So I think the first thing I want to share with you, and I will apologize for not having slides. I wanted to keep this more conversational rather than just giving you, a series of slides. So if there's anything you'd like me to repeat at the end or go over again, I'm happy to do so. These are not like guaranteed to work every time. They have served me well. And I'll be perfectly honest, most of it's going to be stuff that you already know. But I think reframing it and putting it in a way that connects with each other, I think will be helpful. And sometimes it's just nice to have somebody else say these things. And so at the beginning, I guess the first thing I will say, it's going to take work, right? There's nothing about this where you don't have to put any extra effort and in your perspective and have things change. It just world doesn't work that way, and neither does this. And so how do you change that perspective? So the first thing, I have 5 things that I use frequently, some with more success than others and more frequency than others, but I always come back to them and they serve me well. So let's go ahead and just jump right in. So the first one is I hate to use something that you shouldn't do to show how to do something, right? I know that doesn't necessarily work well, but I am going to use it in this case because it's a negative thing, and that's deficit thinking. Avoiding that deficit thinking. How many of you don't have to raise hands, but just in your head, how many of you have ever said after the first day, well, only 179 more to go, right? So many of us have had that belief. And then that makes for a long year when you're like, oh my God, I'm already counting down. You ever see those desk calendars where it gives you like the day and the number of days left? Like if you're at day 179, like it's going to seem like a long 10 months. So finding ways to avoid that is I think really important. Other things like, this kid can't do this. This kid can't learn this problem, or this kid can't learn how to behave in class. We've already established we've labeled a kid as being able to do something or not being able to do something. And that's that deficit mindset where it's almost like becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. You say, oh my God, this is going to be such a long year, right? You're willing it into existence. And I know these are just things we say, but when you say them often enough and the people around you are saying them, I really do think it has its slow sort of creep into your psyche and into your soul and becomes the way that year is going to go. And God forbid, you have somebody from a previous year go, oh my God, this is the toughest group we've had in years, right? How many of you heard somebody say that? Like, oh, you better be careful. Like this group is going to challenge you. And you're already going into the year, worried about what you're going to face. And now it's like, oh my, the kids are so immature. When we start to look at things like that from that negative space, right, that blank space, we're going to fill it with more negativity. It's just human nature, right? This is what we do as educators, right? We complain, and it's a part of how we process, and it's a part of how we make sense of things. But sometimes that complaining turns into a state of being. And so the first thing that I'm going to ask you to do, if you're looking to stay positive, is recognize the deficit thinking in yourself, right? Just making an assumption that somebody can do something or can't do something or won't do something. Just assuming that the year is going to be bad because it didn't get off to the start that you had hoped, right? Or that, oh, this parent is going to be the most difficult parent I've ever had. These things become reality more often than we realize. And so I think if you can, looking at the negative and looking at all the reasons to avoid something, it becomes very difficult to become positive in that. All right. The other part of this that I want to do is because this is also a deficit, is avoid the word should, right? I know people talk about it, but I cannot stress this enough. That word should. Parents should do this with their kids. They should be raising their kids better. Principal should be doing this when a kid gets sent to the office. One, the word should applies, it just implies a judgment right off the bat, because it creates the assumption that either they're incompetent, they don't know what they're doing, or that you know better. And so now we've already assumed a deficit without knowing what a parent is doing, or the beliefs and values of the administrator, or what a kid, has learned or dealt with in terms of trauma, right? So that word should it can become really, really difficult because now we're standing in judgment of a child, a parent, a colleague. And that also becomes really, really difficult to work around. And you can't control that. You can't control what a parent should do. You can't control what an administrator should do. And so we focus on what we can do. So all right, so that's the don't do this part of the rest of it. The others are more action oriented. When I was first teaching, I taught at a high school in Tacoma, Washington, my first 2 years. And man, I didn't know what I was doing. I was teaching a subject that I didn't really know. I was a Spanish minor in college and they needed a Spanish teacher. And so I applied and I wasn't fluent. And I'm sitting in class with kids that speak better Spanish than I do. And, and so I became very self-conscious and worried. And what am I going to do? So all of a sudden I was staying late, right? 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 o'clock. Some nights it was 9:30, right? And there was just always seemed like there was more to do. And I was putting tons of pressure on myself. And I was like, how am I ever going to do this? And thankfully, one of the veteran teachers pulled me aside after, I don't know, a few months, and he's like, knock it off. He's like, stop. He's like, because you're going to burn out in 5 years and you're going to be out of the profession and you'll have nothing to show for it. He's like, I'm going to give you a piece of advice that has served me well, so I'm going to pass this on to you. So because staying positive also means being able to manage your time appropriately to create the things that we're going to talk about in a little bit. First of all, if you're going to take work home, leave early. I cannot stress that enough. If your contractual time is 3:05 and you plan on taking work home, then leave at 3:05. And I know I shouldn't say that as an administrator, but if we don't do that, we find that we're staying late and we're not getting everything done, and one day bleeds to the next, yada, yada, yada. And if you're gonna stay late, get it done, right? Get it done. There's never enough time to do the things that we need to do. So we have to create within ourselves and our worlds opportunities for us to find joy and positivity. And we can't do that if we're looking at a stack of papers that have to be graded or tests that have to be written. This teacher also gave me advice that I still think about today as an administrator. We are in a profession where there's almost always a tomorrow. We don't work in medicine. We don't work in law. No one's going to die or go to jail if we don't get something done that moment. And while you can't use that obviously as an absolute, it does apply in terms of our mindsets. And so creating opportunities for yourself to find that joy and not be so overburdened by that work, it's hard to do. It is a routine changer to say, all right, I'm going to take these papers home and grade them. I had a professor in college one time, and I didn't quite do this, but I kind of did. He was telling me about a time when that he and a friend had gone to Florida on vacation. And how many of you have ever gone on vacation, have taken a stack of papers? I'm going to grade them on the plane, right? I'm going to get them done at the hotel room at night. Okay, I've done that, right? More often than not. And you know how many papers I graded? 0. I'm not doing that on the plane. I want to have an umbrella drink. I want to enjoy the ride. I want to do whatever. I'm not grading papers. And then all week long, you're staring at that stack. So he's telling me one time that they were on the freeway going through Florida, and he looked at his bag and he looked at the papers and he rolled down his window and he just flung them out, the whole stack. And he's like, they just went everywhere. And I was like, you gotta be kidding me. I can't believe that you did that. And he's like, I decided at that moment I was not going to let my job, right, interfere with my personal life. I have to have a separation. And I've thought about that, and I shouldn't admit this, but one day I didn't throw them out the windows, but I might have left them in the hotel room so that when I got back, I was like, kids, I'm so sorry. I left the papers. We find ways to adjust our lives so that we can find the positivity in there. When one starts to bleed into the other, it becomes a real problem. You guys remember teaching during COVID? How awful was that? Not just the art of doing a Zoom call and checking in, but I heard from untold teachers, and myself being an educator, my wife is a 8th grade math teacher of 30 years. How many people had built an office in their home, their bedroom, or on their sofa, so that when the day was done and you entered the class, you're still at work, right? Like nothing changed in your environment. So I guess I would say that when it comes to getting work done, get it done and find the separation, because that's going to allow you to find the joy, right? Otherwise, if you're grading papers and you're watching TV, my wife and I hope there's nobody from Newton in here, but she will do this, right? Grade papers and watch TV, and she's half listening to me and half watching television. And she talks about how she feels like the days start to bleed into each other. And so finding a way to make that separation. People often say, think about self-care and take care of yourself. And all that is very true. But you have to be purposeful about it, right? Be purposeful at work. If you're going to attend a meeting, attend the meeting. If you're going to be home for your kids, for your spouse, for yourself, whatever it might be. So the first action step would really be go home on time if you're taking work. If you're going to stay late, find a place to walk away and go home and enjoy that day and what you can of it. It will change your professional practice if you're not already doing it. My third tip that I use, and I think this is probably for me, this is probably the most powerful one, is as educators, we have to find time for intentional, purposeful, meaningful interactions with our students, our colleagues, and our parents. Right? You're going to have to make the time. And I know we all say, well, I don't have time. You've got 5 minutes, right? You do. You have it. And if you can find a way to do this, and I'll walk through some of the steps that I use to make sure that I get the joy out of the day. I hope that you will hear some of these too. It's going to seem like a lot of work at first. Oh my God, I'm going to add this to my plate. And have to find 5 minutes here or 5 minutes there when I really need to go to the bathroom or eat my lunch, or I got kids coming in for extra help. Yes, all of these are true, but there has to be somewhere in that day, has to be. And if not, you're going to have to make it where that extra few minutes, you need to find the time or produce the time somehow, some way. So what I would say is this: think about why you got into education to begin with, right? What were your values, right? We all come at education for, in some cases, many of the same reasons, but in some cases for varied reasons. Get back to what brought you into this field, right? For me, I wanted to be the teacher that I never had. Right. And maybe I watched too many movies, but I wanted to be Robin Williams in Dead Poet Society. To me, that was like the epitome of education. And my first few years, I did the whole "Oh Captain, my Captain" thing, and I stood on desks, and I wanted that for myself. And I found that over years, I had started to let that part slip away. I was getting bogged down by emails and requests and curriculum and things. And there was a time where I feel like I lost that part of me. And then becoming an administrator, you're trying to be something that's just not in your nature necessarily at the beginning, right? And you're trying to get back to those values. But when you do, and you can find the time to reflect on what is that brought you to teaching, what is it that you wanted to get out of it, right? Getting back to those values is going to create an opportunity for you to have that joy. I promise it will. When you do this, when you really think about it, I want you to think about it in a couple of ways. One, this time that you're finding, you have to be intentional about it, right? So as an administrator, when I want to go through and do walkthroughs in classes, I have to block out time. I have to say from 9:30 to 10:30, that is my time that I'm not scheduling anything. I'm not in my office. I am classroom to classroom, even if it's just for 10-minute observations. I have to be intentional about that time. But I also have to be intentional about whose classroom I'm going to see, right? And who I'm going to converse with afterwards about it. If I just pop into the nearest classrooms, we find ourselves in the same classes, in the same sections, and we're not getting the full scope of what our educators are doing. So I create a chart, for example, of sections, of times, so that I'm trying to make sure that I see people in the morning, I see people in the afternoon, beginning, middle, end of class, being intentional about that. What I'm going to ask you to do, though, is to think about how do you find intentionality with a student, right? Because this will get you back to your values. Something brought you to this career. What is it? Find, if you can, that kid that needs somebody. And yes, we hear horrible things about students, like recently in Georgia and other things, and how they're alone. And that's all, and that is absolutely true. But I think we spend so much time focusing on the kids that already have so much support that we miss some of the ones that we never really think about. How many of your students are kids that they're good kids? They do just well enough to get by. They're not a behavior problem. And you say, you know what? I don't really have time to help that kid like I wish I could, but I know they're going to be fine next year. I know they're going to be fine in high school. Taking the time to find a student that you intentionally want to make sure that you connect with. Not only will it make that, it has the potential of changing that kid's whole world, but it's actually going to bring you back to the values that got you into this career to begin with, right? For some of you, it's I really wanted to work with special education students because I have a sister who special needs and I want to continue that work. Others like me want to do it for different reasons. It could be 100 things. Find the student that represents that. Or if you're really feeling wild, go with somebody that you hardly ever interact with. If you are intentional about making the time for that student, I promise you that you're going to find it, but also you're going to be compelled to try it because now you've put a face and a name. And that I think is the most important part of this particular tip. We're putting a face and a name to the work that we want to do. It's not just, I'm going to stand out in front of my classroom and say hello to every student as they go by. It's a great strategy. We should all be doing it. But I use the word should, dang. The idea though of saying, I am going to take a few minutes, whether it's at the end of class or at lunch. I watched a teacher today come in to the lunchroom and sit down with kids and talk about field hockey. She knew the girl was on the team. And to sit and just watch her from afar as I'm doing lunch duty, to me, that was so impressive. One, because this teacher is willing to give up, precious time, right? You get 22 minutes for lunch. You want to make sure that you have every moment of it. But she used that time, or at least a portion of it, to connect with a kid in a comfortable way that built trust. And the smile on this teacher's face when she got up, it was priceless. Like it warmed my heart as an administrator because here was exactly what we had been talking about in our building, finding a way to make that intentional connection and make it not about necessarily academics, though it can be, right? You might want to build an academic connection, right? Increase engagement. It might be social emotional. It might be 100 other things. But finding a way to put a name and a face to it. Now you're going to feel compelled because I know what's going to happen because I feel this way. You're going to feel like you owe it to yourself and you owe it to that kid to do it because you've committed somewhere in your mind. But it has to be more than just that. Once you've dedicated that time, right, and you've been intentional about who and what and when you're going to do it, and the frequency, nothing works just one time. Now you have to have the purpose and the meaning behind it. And to do that, this is going to sound very similar to your evaluations in TeachPoint or whatever program you use. You need to create an action plan. What am I actually going to do to connect with this kid? Because without committing to that specific set of steps, it may just kind of fall by the wayside, or it may just be kind of here and there. But if I say, I'm going to focus on, and for example, my goal this year, I have 3 sixth graders who if I look at the arc of where I think they're going to go if left unchecked, they could become problematic as the years go on. So I want to build a relationship and trust and a dialogue and create structures that we can have a discussion that isn't just authoritarian and student, right? But there's something a little bit different there. I need their buy-in and their investment. So what is my plan? At least once a month, preferably twice. I'm going to conduct a little group, whether we do it at lunch or after school. I'll buy the food, we'll provide the time, however it works. And we're going to talk about their experiences at school, what's working, what's not. We're going to talk about the peer interactions and build that trust and share stories and help to see each other as humans so that when something inevitably happens, and hopefully it doesn't, but if it does, that we have a solid foundation to build on. So I have a plan that I am using to say 1 to 2 times a month, I'm going to connect with this group, and it will be a focused discussion in a fun way that I think they will become engaged in. And then making it meaningful as well. All right. If you do this, set a goal. What is it you hope to accomplish? Because if it's just I want to connect with the kid and I want to have a good rapport. I know this is a very common principle thing, and I remember seeing it when I was a young teacher. If you haven't, it's very powerful. Principal puts up like the giant post-it paper all over the library or meeting space, and it's got all the kids' names listed in the school. Some of you, I can see a nodding head that maybe are aware of this. Principal then comes around and gives everybody stickers and says, okay, put a sticker next to the name of the kids that you have really great connections with. And man, it's fun, right? You're like, oh, I love that kid. And you're sharing stories with all this. And then you sit down and the principal hits you over the head, at least ours did, with, I don't want to focus on the kids that have stickers. Look at the number of kids that have nothing. And it's heartbreaking. It's awful because you realize you're so invested in spending time and that effort with certain kids that other kids are being left beside. So if you are going to do it, you are going to, if you are going to do this thing, set a goal. What do you hope to accomplish? Like in the end of it, what do you want to get out of it? Just like you would with your classroom, right? You set a goal for a learning objective, and then at the end of it, you have to ask yourself, how do I know they learned it? Right? If I talk for an hour like I'm doing now, how do I know you're going to walk away with anything? Hopefully, there's evidence in the chat to say something that provides that rapport, that evidence that I know I had an impact. If you're willing to do the same, right? Put a face and a name, create a goal. I mean, an action step, create a goal, and then figure out what evidence you need to prove it. And it might be mostly anecdotal, right? My job is to make this kid smile once a day, right? And then it becomes twice. Whatever it needs to be, wherever you meet the kids where they are, I think if you are willing to put that time and effort and you are willing to treat it like almost like an evaluation, you're gonna find the joy, right? Because that's the good stuff. That's the fun stuff. That's why we get into it. Those interactions with kids. And let's be honest, we work in middle schools, right? You know, where else do you get to act like a 12-year-old, right? And it's cool, right? The kids like it when you're on their level. This is the place where you can do that. And so taking the time to be purposeful and meaningful about it will make sure that you get what you need out of it when it comes to the end. And I promise you, it will bring you back to the purpose of your professional life. It'll add purpose. It'll get back to the values that you once had when you were that idealistic young teacher stepping in class for the first time. All right. I'm going to wrap up these next two pretty quickly. So turns out I'm taking longer than I thought, which is great. Usually I talk way too fast. So our fourth thing, this one's quick. Set your environment. All right. Yes, have your classroom. It should be inviting and fun for all that. But I'm actually going to say, like, we set up break spaces for our kids. Sometimes we do it in the classroom, right, where a kid can take a break, or it might be a certain nook in the hallway or places where like are safe spaces for kids. It might be the library. It might be someplace where they can go when they are, dysregulated, or they need some place to be where they can just calm down. You guys, we need it too, right? Like you have some of these interactions and we need to get regulated, but we don't have the luxury of just crawling into a nook in the hallway and just letting that stuff kind of wash away. We've got another 25 kids coming into the room. So you're going to have to find a way to set your environment. And what I mean by that is, for many of us, some of us spend more time at work than we do awake at home, right? You get home at 5 o'clock and you're going to bed at 9:30, 10, right? You're spending more waking time at work. So you got to create yourself a little bit of home. So if you look behind me, you can see I've got, photos that I've taken from trips, like this one behind me, the Eiffel Tower. I put these here, not, I mean, they're for the kids, but they're also really, they're more for me. So when I'm having that tough day, if I got a tough parent email or I've had a tough, difficult conversation, I can look at that right there. And I remember that exactly what happened. I remember getting out of the Uber and my wife seeing three-card Monte being played right at the base of it. And she's a math teacher, remember? So she thought she had it figured out. She was going to use probability and critical thinking to solve the three-card Monte, but she didn't have any money. So she asked me I gave her 100 euros, 100 euros. And she's like, look at all these people are winning. I got it figured out. I was like, Kim, you're being played. And of course she throws down the 100 euros and lost it. But I can laugh at that. And that's a memory so that when I'm rather than just letting the negativity wash over, I can find something to laugh at, right? I can find a little bit of joy, a memory that I focus on that allows me to get back to that happy place. I keep a bookshelf and there's photos of my kids and my wife and I bobbleheads, and I even have this Funko Pop collection of like all like flawed leaders. Like you remember like Richard Vernon from Breakfast Club, there's Michael Scott, there's Bill Lumbergh from Office Space, like all these leaders that just aren't quite really good at what they do. And I look at it and I laugh because one, because I love the movies, but two, it reminds me that you know what, you don't need to be perfect to be good at this, and you can laugh at yourself and not take yourself too seriously. So setting your environment creates a place for you to be able to take a breath and remember the joy and the fun that you have outside of your work. And it separates a little bit your work from home because you're creating, I know it seems counterintuitive, you're creating a little bit of home, but it just gives you a little bit of a place to just kind of duck out of work for a minute, even though if only for a minute, to find that positivity and that funny. All right. And then finally, the last thing that I'll end with, and I think this is equally important. Working in middle school can be absurd. Some of the things that we hear kids say, some of the things that we see kids do, and you have to laugh at it. You have to, because otherwise you'd pull your hair out, right? And as somebody who doesn't have much, right? I've done my share of hair pulling. You have to find the absurdity in what you're seeing, and sometimes you have to laugh at it, and that's tough. I mean, for example, for me, I remember last year we had a student who really broke down, and I'm standing in the office, and he threw his cell phone at me as hard as any kid could, right? And I must have had like my Wonder Woman bracelets on at the time because I was like pling pling, right? I dodged the cell phone, but then he starts hitting me and kicking me, and he's really going at me, right? And I was like, man, I got to watch more of these movies, right? I was like defending myself, and afterwards, I had that moment where I was like, okay, I can go home and you know what, have a glass of wine this tall, right? And just forget it, or I can lean into it. And I started to laugh at it because like how absurd is this that I'm getting my rear end kicked by a 12-year-old. I can't do anything about it. So I'm gonna laugh because it's the only thing I can control. And it never caused me a sleepless moment. It actually helped me to build a good relationship with the kid because now it's not adversarial, right? I'm not thinking about that difficult thing and how mad you made me and how much I was hurt. I'm thinking about how funny it was, right? Even if it's funny because it's sad that I have a kid swinging and punching and kicking and throwing stuff at me, but it helped me process it in a way that I was able to move on without letting it control my life, and end up with a great story out of it. Middle schoolers, they live in these highs and lows, right? It comes with it, but that's a roller coaster. If you stay on it with them, you're going to get sick. So finding that way to enjoy the absurdity a little bit allows you to sort of even out. And so those really high highs aren't too much, and those really lows aren't too much. You're able to find what's there and see it for what it is. And so the biggest thing you can do in that moment is just not to take yourself too seriously, right? We're middle school educators. Something about middle school people, we are our own breed. I've taught high school. I've never taught elementary school, but being a middle school teacher, I was like, I don't want to teach 13-year-olds. I hated being 13, and I fell in love with it. There's something about us that bonds us that we can look at that. And so I would encourage you as you're doing this, to think about these things, to find the absurdity and to laugh, to create spaces for joy in your life, to connect with a kid or more in a meaningful, purposeful, positive way, right? To avoid that negative thinking that sabotages any of the work that you want to do from the beginning, right? If you're willing to do those things and you're willing to make time for yourself, I think you're going to have a very successful year. You're going to be able to move from September to October. And yes, I know everything I just said is easier said than done. It takes work, but if you're willing to front load it, it will pay off tenfold. I promise you. Thank you for your time. I'm open to questions. If anybody has anything, thank you so much.